I never expected that a simple trip to the barber could change my life forever. It wasn't like I went looking for anything extraordinary, nor did I think a routine visit would take such a surprising turn. But life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. Let me start by saying that I'm 30 years old, and I work as a graphic designer at a tech company. My life has always been pretty predictable, and I liked it that way. Days blurred together with work, deadlines, and the occasional night out with friends, but everything was stable. At least it used to be. For weeks, my friends had been reminding me about the upcoming company holiday party, and of course, I had completely forgotten about it. I was so caught up in a new project that I hadn't even noticed how disheveled I had become. My hair was getting too long, and I hadn't even shaved in days. One day, my colleague and close friend Claire gave me an honest but helpful reminder. You might want to do something with that hair before the party, Steve. It's looking pretty wild. She was right, of course. I hadn't given any thought to how I looked lately. I had been too consumed with work. After hearing her, I decided it was time to get my hair sorted before the party. The clock was ticking, and I needed a good barber that could fit me in on short notice. After looking around for a place that seemed nice enough but not too flashy, I settled on a local spot called The Gentleman's Cut. It had decent reviews, and most importantly, they had an appointment open that day. I arrived at The Gentleman's Cut right on time, feeling a little irritated about having to squeeze in this chore after a long day of meetings. To be honest, I would have preferred to just go home, sit on the couch, and unwind with some comfort food. But I'd promised I would show up, and now I was here, walking through the door of a small, cozy barbershop. The bell jingled above me as I entered, and I was greeted by a warm smile from a guy behind the counter. His name was Mark, and he looked more like someone who belonged in a high-end magazine than a barbershop. Tall, with a well-groomed beard and a nice suit, he didn't seem like the kind of person I'd expect to find at a small neighborhood barbershop. "Hey there, you must be Steve," Mark said as he approached. "I'm Mark, and I'll be taking care of you today." He led me to a comfortable leather chair in the back of the shop. It wasn't what I expected. It felt more like a luxury experience than a regular haircut. I was already starting to feel a little more relaxed as I took a seat. Mark immediately asked if I wanted something to drink while he prepped his tools. "How about a glass of whiskey?" he suggested, pulling a bottle from behind the counter. It wasn't something I normally did, drinking with a stranger in a place like this, but for some reason I agreed. Maybe it was the end of the week, or maybe I just needed something to take the edge off. He poured 2 glasses and we began to chat. As he worked, he asked about my job, what I was working on, and seemed genuinely interested in the little details of my life. I felt at ease with him. The conversation flowed naturally, and before I knew it, the minutes started slipping away. As Mark worked his way through my hair, I noticed how skillful and attentive he was. His fingers moved with precision, and each cut felt measured, as though he was making an artwork of my hair. His focus was sharp, but there was something else too, an ease in his manner that made me feel incredibly comfortable. It was as if we had known each other much longer than just a few minutes. We continued to talk about everything and nothing, and I found myself genuinely enjoying the conversation. He seemed like someone I could talk to for hours, someone who understood more than just the surface-level questions. I had always kept things casual and light, but there was a part of me that felt drawn to him in a way I hadn't experienced before. Maybe it was the whiskey or the intimacy of the moment, but there was something undeniably magnetic about Mark. As the minutes went by, he moved closer, adjusting my hair and occasionally brushing his fingers against the back of my neck. Each touch, subtle as it was, sent a little jolt of electricity through my body. I tried to ignore it, focusing on the conversation, but the more we spoke, the more I found myself becoming aware of how close he was, how much I liked being around him. When he finished with my hair, Mark stepped back and asked, "How's it feel? Do you like it?" His eyes were searching mine, waiting for my reaction. I looked at myself in the mirror, surprised at how good I looked. "It's perfect. I didn't expect to feel this refreshed," I said, my voice a little softer than usual. There was something more to my words, something that felt like an unspoken connection. Mark smiled and nodded. I'm glad. It's always good to make people feel better about themselves. There was a quiet moment between us. I realized I had been staring a little too long, and quickly looked away, feeling the heat rise to my cheeks. But Mark didn't seem bothered. He just kept smiling that warm, knowing smile. Well, I guess that's it for today, Mark said, as he started to put his tools away. You're free to go whenever you're ready. As I stood up to leave, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted during my time at the salon. The way Mark had looked at me, the way he spoke, it felt like more than just a professional interaction. There was a subtle tension, an energy that was hard to ignore, and for some reason, I felt drawn to him in a way that I wasn't used to. I grabbed my jacket, preparing to head out when Mark suddenly spoke up. Hey, he said, his voice low. I was wondering, would you want to grab a drink sometime? Maybe outside of the shop? It's just, I don't know, we seem to get along pretty well, and I'd like to continue the conversation. The invitation caught me off guard. I wasn't sure how to react. I had never thought about men this way before. I considered myself straight, but something about Mark made me feel like I was seeing him through a completely new lens. I stood frozen for a moment, trying to sort through my thoughts. I had never been in a situation like this before, but there was something inviting about Mark's easygoing demeanor, and the way he was asking was casual enough that it didn't make me feel pressured. After what felt like an eternity, I finally answered, Sure, I'd like that. Let me know when you're free. Mark's eyes lit up at my response, and for a second, I caught a glimpse of something deeper in his expression. A mix of surprise and joy, almost like he hadn't expected me to say yes. Great, he said, his smile widening. I'll message you. It'll be fun. I walked out of the salon, my heart pounding a little faster than usual. I couldn't understand why I was feeling this way, but the whole experience, Mark, the whiskey, the conversation, had left me thinking about him long after I left. I kept replaying the last few minutes in my mind. What did I just agree to? Was this just a casual hangout? Or was it something more? The ride home felt different. The city seemed quieter, and I was more aware of my surroundings. I had a lot of questions swirling in my head, and I couldn't stop thinking about Mark. But one thing was certain, something had changed. I wasn't just a guy who came in for a haircut anymore. As the evening continued, the chemistry between Mark and I grew undeniable. The conversation had started light and easy, but the longer we spoke, the more I felt an unspoken tension building between us. Hey, thanks for watching until this point. Please leave a comment if you're enjoying the video. It really helps us grow the channel and reach more people. And hey, thank you very much. Let's get back to story. There was something magnetic about him, a quiet intensity that I couldn't quite explain. With every laugh, every shared look, I felt closer to him, closer in a way that went beyond just friendship. By the time we finished our drinks, the bar was quieter, and the lights had dimmed further. The atmosphere felt more intimate now, as if we were the only two people left in the world. Mark leaned forward slightly, his eyes fixed on mine. There was a question in his gaze, something vulnerable and real. Do you feel this? Mark asked, his voice soft but steady. I knew exactly what he meant. The electric pull between us had become almost tangible. It was more than just attraction. It was as if we were being drawn together by forces we couldn't control. I nodded slowly, my heart racing. Yeah, I whispered. I feel it. Mark's smile deepened, and for a moment we just sat there, the silence between us heavy with everything we weren't yet saying. Then, without a word, he stood up and extended his hand. There was a quiet confidence in his movements that I found myself responding to without hesitation. Let's go for a walk, he suggested, his voice low, inviting. I stood up, my body already following his lead. There was no turning back now. We left the bar and walked into the cool night air, the city's lights flickering around us. The streets were empty, the quiet broken only by our footsteps. It felt like the whole world had faded away, leaving just the two of us. We walked for a while without speaking, but the air between us was charged, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. When we finally stopped near a quiet park bench, Mark turned to face me, his eyes searching mine as if asking for permission without using words. Before I knew it, Mark's lips were on mine. The kiss was gentle at first, hesitant, as if we were both testing the waters. But as our mouths moved together, it deepened, growing more urgent, more desperate. It was as though we had both been waiting for this moment, and now that it was happening, we couldn't stop. Mark's hands moved to my back, pulling me closer, his body heat radiating through my clothes. My own hands found their way to his shoulders, then his chest, feeling the solid muscles beneath his shirt. Everything around us disappeared. There was only the taste of his lips, the warmth of his body, and the growing intensity between us. The kiss eventually slowed, and we pulled away, both of us breathless, hearts pounding in our chests. Mark's hand cupped my cheek, his thumb lightly grazing my skin as he looked at me with a softness that made my chest tighten. "I don't want to rush this," he said quietly, his voice almost a whisper. "Neither do I replied, my voice shaky with emotions I wasn't used to feeling. We stood there for a few moments, just holding each other's gaze. The tension was still there, but now it was mixed with something else. Something deeper, something more real. Without speaking, we made our way to my apartment, each step filled with anticipation. Once inside, Mark locked the door behind us, and before I could even process what was happening, his lips were on mine again. This time, there was no hesitation, no doubt. It was just us, our bodies moving together, exploring what we had both been feeling for weeks. We moved slowly at first, savoring each touch, each kiss. My hands roamed over Mark's body, feeling the muscles beneath his shirt, the warmth of his skin. He responded in kind, his hands sliding under my shirt, sending shivers through me. There was no rush, no urgency. It was just us, finally giving in to the chemistry that had been building between us. As the night went on, we shared more than just kisses. We explored each other's bodies, slowly, gently. The experience was new to me, but with Mark, it felt natural, like everything was falling into place. I didn't question it. I just let it happen. The days after that night felt like I had stepped into a new reality. Everything was brighter, more vivid, as if I were seeing the world with fresh eyes. The connection I had with Mark had transformed into something deeper, something that went beyond just physical attraction. It was as if we were two puzzle pieces that had been searching for each other all along. We spent every day together after that, each moment more meaningful than the last. Our conversations flowed easily, and every glance, every touch, carried a weight of unspoken feelings. There was no need for words to describe what was happening between us. We both understood it instinctively, but with every passing day, the reality of what was unfolding between us began to sink in. This wasn't just a fling, a casual affair. We were building something real, something that neither of us had expected. And even though I was beginning to embrace the new feelings, there was still a part of me that questioned what this meant for my life. I had never imagined that this would happen to me, that I would find myself in a relationship with another man. Yet here I was, happier than I had ever been. One evening, after a long day of work, we found ourselves back at my place. Mark was on the couch, flipping through the channels on the TV, while I stood in the kitchen, preparing dinner. The normalcy of the moment struck me. It was a quiet night, like any other, but with Mark there, it felt different. Felt right. "Smells good," Mark said, looking up at me with that warm smile that always made my heart skip a beat. I smiled back. "Thanks. I thought we could keep it simple tonight." He raised an eyebrow. "What, no fancy date night? No five-star restaurant?" I laughed, shaking my head as I stirred the sauce. "Nope. Just us and some homemade pasta." Mark got up from the couch and walked over to where I stood, standing behind me. His hands rested lightly on my shoulders, and I could feel the heat of his body against mine. For a moment, I froze, the electricity between us crackling in the air. "Dinner looks amazing," he said softly, his breath warm against my neck. "But, I think I'd rather be doing something else right now." I turned around slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. Mark's eyes were dark with desire, and his expression was a mixture of tenderness and need. Without a word, he leaned down and kissed me again, more urgently this time, as if he had been waiting for me to make the first move. The kiss was heated, full of everything we had been holding back. My hands found their way to his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart as we pressed closer together. We broke away for a moment, just enough to catch our breath, but the tension between us was unbearable. Mark's hands moved to the hem of my shirt, lifting it slowly, his fingertips grazing my skin as he exposed more of me. "Mark," I whispered, my voice shaky. "Are you sure?" He didn't hesitate. His lips found mine again as his hands slid lower, unbuckling my belt with practiced ease. There was no more doubt, no more hesitation. This was happening, and I wanted it as much as he did. We were both ready, both willing to explore this new part of our relationship. As the night unfolded, we didn't rush. We took our time, exploring each other, savoring every moment. The connection we shared felt deeper than just the physical. It was emotional, raw, and real. I didn't just feel desired. I felt understood, accepted, completely seen for the first time in my life. When we finally collapsed together on the couch, tangled in the warmth of each other's embrace, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. This was where I was meant to be. I didn't have to hide. I didn't have to question myself anymore. With Mark, I had found something I hadn't even known I was looking for. Someone who loved me not for who I was supposed to be, but for who I truly was. The days after that night felt like they had shifted something deep inside me. I had always lived my life by a set of rules: work, deadlines, responsibilities, and had convinced myself that romance wasn't something I had time for. But now, I couldn't ignore the feeling that everything had changed. My heart raced every time I thought about Mark, and there was this undeniable pull to him that I couldn't explain. It was like everything I thought I knew about myself had been turned upside down, and I was finally allowing myself to feel, to really feel. We continued seeing each other almost every day. We laughed, we talked about everything and nothing, and we shared intimate moments that had no agenda. Just the two of us, together. There was a comfort in that, an ease that made me realize I had never truly experienced connection like this before. It wasn't just the physical attraction that kept me coming back. It was the way Mark looked at me, like I was someone worth being with, someone who was enough. One evening, as we sat on my couch, watching some random TV show, I noticed Mark's hand resting near mine. Our fingers brushed casually, but that simple touch sent a wave of heat through my body. I looked at him, and he was already staring at me, his eyes full of something I couldn't quite place. Something intense, vulnerable, yet full of love. "Mark?" I began, unsure of what I was about to say, but I felt the need to speak. "Where is this going?" His hand found mine, fingers interlocking, and I felt a sense of calm wash over me. "I don't know," he replied softly, but there was no hesitation in his voice. "I'm just happy that it's happening. Whatever happens next, we'll figure it out. Together." The simplicity of his words, the certainty in his tone, made my heart flutter. I didn't have all the answers, and I didn't know exactly what the future held for us. But in that moment, I realized that it didn't matter. I had never felt so free. I wasn't bound by expectations, by the weight of others' opinions. I was here with Mark, and that was all that mattered. As the days went by, things seemed to fall into place naturally. We spent weekends exploring new places in the city, having picnics in the park, and sometimes just lying in bed, wrapped in each other's arms. There were no pretenses, no rushing to label what we had. It was real, and it was ours. One night, Mark came over after work, as usual. He had a big smile on his face, the kind of smile that always made me feel like everything was going to be okay. He sat beside me on the couch, his legs stretched out next to mine. He turned to me, his expression serious but warm. "Can I ask you something?" he said, his voice a little nervous. "Of course," I replied, sensing something important was coming. He paused for a moment, gathering his thoughts. "How do you feel about living together?" The question took me by surprise. We hadn't really talked about the future, and while we both had grown closer, the idea of living together hadn't crossed my mind. But looking into his eyes, I realized that the thought of being apart felt impossible. "I'd like that," I said, my voice steady, though my heart was pounding. "I think it's time. I think it's what we're both ready for." Mark's face lit up with a grin, and he leaned over, kissing me on the cheek. "I'm really glad to hear that," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I've never been so sure of anything." The following weeks passed by quickly, and Mark and I found ourselves settling into our new rhythm together. Living together was a change, but it was a natural one. Our space felt like home, a place where we could truly be ourselves without fear of judgment. I loved waking up to the sound of Mark humming in the kitchen as he made breakfast, and I loved how easy it was to fall asleep next to him at night. His body warm and close, the gentle rise and fall of his chest lulling me into a peaceful slumber. We continued to grow, both as individuals and as a couple. We talked more about the future, our plans for trips, for life beyond just the two of us. We dreamed of moving to a quiet town one day, a place where we could start fresh, live without the pressures of city life, and maybe even open a small cafe or a studio where we could create together. It felt possible, like every little thing we wanted could come true if we just held on to each other and kept supporting one another. One evening, after a long day of work, we sat down on the couch, ready to unwind together. Mark leaned his head on my shoulder, his hand resting on my chest. There was a softness in the air between us, an ease that came from knowing we had everything we needed in this moment. I looked at him, his eyes closed in contentment, and I realized how far we had come from that night at the barbershop. "Do you ever think about how we met?" I asked quietly, running my fingers through his hair. He smiled, lifting his head to look at me. "I do," he said. "I think about it all the time. I never thought a simple haircut would change my life, but I guess fate has a funny way of working, doesn't it?" I chuckled softly, nodding. "I never imagined it either. But here we are." Mark's gaze softened, and he leaned in to kiss me, his lips gentle but firm. The kiss deepened as I pulled him closer, feeling the warmth of his body against mine. There was no rush, no urgency, just the simple connection we had built over time. We took our time, savoring the moment, the love that had blossomed between us. When we finally pulled away, Mark smiled at me, his eyes filled with affection. "I love you," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. I smiled back, my heart swelling with the same sentiment. "I love you too." For the first time in my life, I felt complete. I didn't need to hide anything anymore. There was no fear, no doubt. With Mark, I was free to be myself, to embrace who I truly was, without reservation. And for the first time, I truly understood what it meant to be loved for exactly who you are. As the months went by, life continued to surprise us, but now we faced everything together. We didn't know what the future held, but we didn't need to. The love we shared was strong enough to carry us through whatever came our way. We still talked about our dreams, about starting a life together in the country, and about everything we wanted to do with our future. But for now, we lived in the present, enjoying each day with the love and happiness we had found in each other. And as we stood in the kitchen one evening, cooking dinner together, laughing, talking about nothing and everything, I realized that this was my life now. It wasn't perfect, but it was real and it was beautiful. And with Mark by my side, I knew that no matter what came next, I would be ready to face it with him. We had come so far, and this was just the beginning.